Hello, everybody, and a warm welcome from my side to the session Accelerate the Move from ECC to SAP S/4HANA with Retrofit. My name is Patrick Schmidt. I'm the global owner here in SAP for change control topics. And now I will drive you through the next 45 minutes within that session to present you this topic. So let's start with the disclaimer at the beginning, as always. And so I think that's more or less pretty clear and obvious. So then let's have a look to the agenda. So we will start with the retrofit in principle to guide you what are the different variants and options we provide for customers. Then we will have a look into the S/4HANA check for custom code objects based on the ATC check. We will have a look also on the customizing part for the S/4HANA checks. And at the end, we will close the session with customer examples and also with the technical prerequisites. Okay, let's start. So when we are talking about the retrofit in principle, there are two options in between in the market, which were established during our S4 journey. So many customers are on the way to establish and to install and implement SAP S/4HANA. So what will be the situation? So this means you're running an ECC landscape, you need to provide still productive fixes, productive enhancements, and so on. And in parallel, you build up your project landscape based on a new S/4HANA release. So what will be the case? So this means you have ongoing changes in the ECC landscape, and in parallel, you start to adjust and adopt the SAP S/4HANA functionalities. So what does it mean? More or less, you will run into inconsistencies, and also more or less the systems are more or less not in sync. So this means all the stuff which will be done on the maintenance track needs to be moved also to the project track. How do you do that? Because this could be more or less a lot of effort and more or less customers looking to automate and detect conflicts and sequence issues more or less automatically. So what is the answer from SAP side for this topic? So this means, therefore, we provide the retrofit capability with the S/4HANA specific enhancement. And we are supporting the following combinations. So customers based on ECC move to an S/4HANA release. If you are running an S/4HANA lower release and you want to move to a higher release, also the retrofit will take care that the maintenance track and the project track will be in sync. And also, if you are on the same release and you have ongoing rollout activities, this means also the retrofit will take care that both tracks will be in sync, and later on you can deploy it in a very consistent and stable way into your productive environment. We reach more or less 90% of object level automation. We will come to that later on in the customer examples, that you get really a feeling here what we are doing in that sense. So we differentiate two options, which means the continuous retrofit, which is more or less showed on this slide. So you have an ongoing maintenance track based on ECC, for example, and you have a new SAP S/4HANA release. So now you have the solution manager in place based on 7.2, minimum SP8. And based on that, you have also the integration available into the S/4HANA simplification database based with an ATC hub, for example. And therefore, we can really 90% of all the stuff can be automated and reduce the manual effort to more or less 10%. What does it mean? Whenever you have a release in the maintenance track of a transport request, it will be tracked, it will be more or less registered, and at the end, it will be more or less via the retrofit capability moved in a controlled way in your S/4HANA landscape. The other option, what is also valid and more or less used by many customers, is the so-called sandbox approach. What does it mean? So some customers came up and said, we don't want to stop more or less the ongoing maintenance on the ECC track, but we are on the journey to S4. So now they said we will do it, not the continuous retrofit, we will do it via sandbox approach. What does it mean? The infrastructure itself is the same, but you are doing more or less one-to-many iterations. So you copy the productive environment, upgrade it to an S/4HANA system, 3 or 6 months later, which is the typical scenario, they more or less copy the productive again and retrofit and keep more or less the T1 and the TN here in sync. So both systems will be more or less synchronized, and you know exactly, okay, what are the deltas, and you more or less do the retrofit via the sandbox approach. So this can be done many times. This is also a valid approach, what we have established and what we see outside at customers. So here is also a use case, which means also included an upgrade, in that case from 1809 to 1909. So this means you start here with the sandbox at T1, then you do the upgrade, the conversion and all that stuff, all the necessary things. Then more or less some months later, you create an additional system copy. And then you can do the upgrade, for example, and you do the retrofit between the 1809 and the 1909 system and keep the both system in syncs. All the latest stuff which were imported on the ECC landscape is now part of this sandbox. So this could be done one too many times before you move something later on into the productive mode, and then more as you build up your S4 landscape based on the latest support packages, based on the latest feature packs, or on the latest release. So this means also this is a valid approach, what we see outside and what we are more or less worked out with our customers. Let's have a look at the retrofit in principle. So the retrofit with conflicts. I think this is the most interesting part. And for that, I would like to walk through this example now in this slide. So what does it mean? This is the existing scenario. What we need is the component, the solution manager. We need a development system on the maintenance track, which is also linked via trusted RFC. We have the retrofit system, which is the project landscape based on S4. And then we will walk through the scenario. At the beginning, we are creating a change. And we have a one transport request with a number 3 at the end. We have object 1, we have object 2. And based on that, there is a mechanism, it's called cross-system object log, CSOL, will be created at this point in time when you save the objects to the transport request. So this means this will be registered as part of the solution manager product and the solution manager tool. And this means, therefore, we track all the changes here exactly based on the objects. The next part is that we said, okay, now you touch also similar objects or objects 1, 2, and 3. So this means we have an overlap from 1 and 2, and we do also the changes in the maintenance line. And we store that and save that on a different transport request. So now, what does it mean? At this point in time, when you release the transport request, that the objects will be put on the so-called retrofit list. And now the check procedure will be initiated, because now we check as a first step against the cross-system object log table. So this means at this point in time, we identify object 1 and object 2. The next part is that we use the ATC also during this check phase and run for the relevance of the workbench requests, we will check if there are simplification items. So now the last check is that we also now check the customizing, if there is also something which comes up during our S4 journey. If this is the case, we will set a rating. Red, yellow, and green. So these are the 2 colors. Green means there is no conflict, which could be more or less set as auto retrofit. Or on the other side, there is the yellow one, which is more or less a semi-automated part. So we can use the BC sets, or we can use the SCWB workbench to more or less to sync and to merge the things together. Or if it's not possible, not enabled via this kind of mechanism, we have to do it manually. So now the next step is that for the green cases, we can create an automated transport of copies, which will be created out of the landscape and will be imported into the retrofit system, which means into the project system of the S4. This could be done in an automated way for all the green cases. And so more or less, you can really reduce the human interaction here significantly. So what we need as a prerequisite before we do anything here, we need a so-called a receiver transport request. And the receiver transport request is part and will be created as part of the S4 retrofit system. So in that case, we have the number 4. Important is also during the retrofit process, we will change the originality of the system, which means from deaf to red in that sense. So now, if the receiver transport request is assigned, you can trigger the import of the TUC, because this will also be the receiver transport for the yellow case and also for the red case. So this means now import will be triggered, import will be done in the retrofit system, and now you have the object 3 on the transport request number 4. Now we can walk through the next object 1 and 2. As I said, the red one needs to be done manually and added to the transport request, and the yellow one can be used and can be solved via BC sets or via SCWB. So now everything is in sync, and at this point in time, we are done with this process. We are sure that all the ECC stuff is more or less moved in a controlled way from the maintenance landscape into the project track. So now at this point in time, you can proceed, and so you have more or less cleaned up the environment, and everything is more or less in sync. You will get also the full transparency on the object list, so you can see at any point in time if you have implemented stuff, which means you can see that here implementation status, here it's green and with a eye. So then we have also you can see the number of objects which are rated as green, yellow, and red, and also you can also start directly for the comparison if you select a line and compare the source and the target systems, which help you more or less to see the differences between the different systems. So why is it needed, and why SAP invested heavily into this kind of additional checks for the retrofit? Because the retrofit more or less has a very long tradition in SAP and in the solution manager in the change control area to provide this kind of functionalities and this kind of mechanisms. So this means we found out that we have technical and semantic differences between ECC and S4. And that's the reason we also talked to the colleagues here and integrated the ATC and the ATC checks. Because the ATC cockpit and the ATC checks will provide static and dynamic quality checks for security, for HANA database, and also for the S4 HANA readiness. There will also it's ongoing activities in that sense that we also provide cloud readiness checks if your coding more or less could also move to the cloud and is cloud ready. So exactly this kind of stuff is more or less very helpful because we can also include the simplification database, and we can really check the transports at the release or at the task. It depends what you prefer. And then based on the priority, we can really stop the whole process and the release of the transport request. Also that one here that we integrate the simplification database, which will help us more or less to identify the issues and more or less the points where you have to work on. The checks can be also used and enabled, and in the charm, in the change request management UI, it can be also processed, and you will get more or less also a stop mark here on that side. But that's very important and very helpful for us. This means for that part, for the workbench stuff and for the custom code, this is totally fine, and you are on the safe side with the ATC checks and the ATC hub configuration here. So you can see that here also in the charm, for example. So this means it's part of our transport related check framework. And at this point in time, when you enable the ATC in the satellite system, in the development system, you will get a green light in your change document. And if there's something coming up, then you can see that here as a message and the result, and then you can jump directly into the ATC cockpit to solve the issue. So this is the solvement, or to solve the issue. This will be handled more or less in the ATC cockpit itself. So there's no ignore button in the change request management itself. But this combination could be done. As I said, important is that the retrofit can be used without charm as a standalone option, which is more or less also very popular at the moment, or it can be also used in charm as a combination, or also together with focus build. So what does it mean? What we are doing when we are using the ATC check with retrofit? So this means you need to define that your ATC hub, this could be a single development system, but we will come to that later on, or it could be done typically on the development system of the project landscape of your S4 system. And this means also that during the creation of the retrofit data, we will connect and we will call the S4, the ATC hub, based on this S4 HANA readiness check, and based on the priority 1 and 2, then we will set that to manual, to a red case. This means you need to check in the simplification phase if there is something wrong and which things needs to be done to solve and to overcome this issue. The ATC check is only for custom code. So this means no customizing is part of that. So this means, therefore, we will come to that also in the upcoming slides. We also enhance that on our own for the customizing stuff. A typical question which comes up from a customer side is which system should be used as ATC hub. So there are also three options. So one part could be the S/4HANA development system. Other customers use the S/4HANA test system, or some customers, if they have multiple S4 projects up and running and landscapes, then they can use a separate ATC hub. This should be more or less on the latest S/4HANA release, and then more or less you can integrate and you can load the different simplification databases for the different releases. So there are also some notes and hints what you can do and what are the requirements for this kind of setup. To give you an example here, we have the retrofit object list with ATC impact. So this means you can see that here with the red light. So this means therefore we found a 1 and 2 impact, and which means we set the status to red. And you have to find out, if you have, for example, the field length extension in the first example, there could be an issue, and then you have to check based on the guidance here with the simplification database, which things needs to be done to overcome and to solve this part and this red color. So this means here we support in the best way that you will more or less not run into trouble from ECC to the S4 with your objects. As I said, the ATC and the simplification database is only for custom code. But what's going on with the customizing objects? And that's the reason why we did the enhancement also in addition to the ATC, that we have seen during our projects that the S/4HANA repository objects are typically in a different component. So this means, therefore, we have SAP Apple and versus S4 Core. And also the customizing tables can have only technical differences and semantical differences. So this means this would be really a topic which needs to be covered and needs to be tackled. And that's the reason why we also enhanced and what the existing cross-release scenario here underneath. Because based on that, we could only detect technical table structure differences, but not semantical difference. So with each and every customers, more or less, we learn and we provide more or less enhance this block list and this whitelist for the various objects. And this is more or less part really of these customizing checks, which will be provided via our retrofit setup. That's the reason why it's only in SAP hand. So typically customers need to involve SAP for this part. And then we will more or less, based on our experience, we will have ongoing enhancements of this whitelisted and allow list and this block list. So therefore, we check the table, the views, and so on. We have also exclude objects, which are missing in the simplification database. And so this means also for that, we can provide a complete list of all the customizing objects to support you in the best way. And therefore, we can also identify this kind of attributes and so on. So as I said, this is more or less filled from our side. So based on our project experience and project activities, we provide a block list and the allow list. So this means, therefore, we fill in technical structure differences and define the customizing tables of views, the database check combined with the ATC hub, the block list, and also the allow list. And this needs to be maintained in the solution measure. And we are providing this based on our project experience. And that's the reason why we more or less have it under our control. And we support here our customers with various services. Let's have a look into the customer examples, because many customers came up and said, okay, Patrick, what do you think? And what is more or less your feeling about the amount of objects? What are more or less your experience with in the various customer scenarios? What can be done? And that's the reason why we also identified and more or less collected this kind of information. So we started 2018 with the first customer here based on ECC, moved to S/4HANA 1809. And you can see that here, based on the analysis, that we more or less handled in that project 337 transport requests with more or less on about 54,000 transport objects. And you can see the transport automation rate is more or less 83%. object automation was more or less 74. Step by step, it is the second part, more or less based on this experience. We try to improve continuously our functionalities and our conflict and object detection here in that sense. And for that, 2020, we also highlighted, and this was really a highlight here due to the fact of number of transports and number of objects. So we handled in this project more or less 5,500 transport requests with more than 1.1 million objects. And we reached a transport automation of 85 and object automation rate of 80. So this means 80% of the objects could be managed in a more or less automated or semi-automated way with a retrofit capability, which is a lot. So some customers said really they have a price tag. If they develop something in the maintenance, move it more or less in a controlled way to the project landscape. So they said, okay, this is more or less our calculation. This is a price. And if we have a business case for that, so this means here the retrofit more or less could really fulfill and overachieve this kind of business case, because you saved a lot of time and human interaction, and more or less also reduce the errors here and the problems in the productive environment later on. So this means therefore there is really a huge benefit out of it. Also another one was more or less from an automation rate perspective. It was 94. We handled more or less 9,000 objects in these transports, and we have identified also during our journey with the retrofit and with our customers that we have seen, if we are talking about purely a lot of customizing objects, then we could reach really a 94% object automation rate. If you have more or less a mixture, you will get more or less between 80 and 90%. And we have also one customer who more or less did a lot of modifications in SAP. So then he more or less goes down to more or less 65%. So this means if you have more customizing, the benefit will be much more higher, because you have really a high level of automation in that sense. And this makes it really attractive. So this means we can really support you in a very good way. So we can set up all this stuff very easily. So this means, as I said, the retrofit could be used as standalone capability. And based on Solution Manager 7.8, this can be done really more or less out of the box and very fast. And so then you can really take a benefit out of this whole process. Another important point is also some customers came up and said, hey, we now, after 3 months, now we found out that we run into trouble between the synchronization of ECC and the S4 landscape. And it's not a problem to start at this point in time. We have also built-in mechanisms that we more or less recalculate also the transports for a dedicated timeline. And then we can more or less create the retrofit data, and more or less we can bring it back. So this means also if you start a little bit later, after your project starts between ECC and S4, we can step in and can help you easily to improve this kind of functionalities. So it's very helpful, and it's very also beneficial in that sense. So when we are talking about the technical prerequisites, as I said, we need the ATC check, which is available on ST720, which is more or less available in SP7. So we need an ATC hub system on 7.52 NetWeaver or higher, and then we can more or less implement and use this kind of ATC functionality. We have also the customizing checks are available out of the box with SP12. So this means therefore also we did this kind of enhancement. And we have also some pilot nodes. Pilot node does not mean that you are the first one which are using this kind of stuff. It's more or less for us that we can have a mechanism under control to enhance this kind of functionality. And then this is more or less needed, that we have it here more or less under control, that you can request and we can know exactly who is using our functionalities in that sense. So that's the reason, don't be afraid about the pilot. So we have now established over the last years many customers using this in a successful way all around the globe. So that is very, very important. Okay, then that's all from my side. thank you very much for the time.